Hi, I'm Liz Verdecchia with the International Boundary and Water Commission. It's a small agency, federal agency that was mentioned this morning in the plenary talks. We manage international treaties between Mexico and the U.S., including the treaty that deals with managing the Rio Grande, delivering water to Mexico. So we have done a handful of riparian restoration projects in the section of the river of the Rio Grande in New Mexico and western Texas. And none of our restoration efforts are possible without our collaborative relationship. So that's what I wanted to share today. It's the Rio Grande Canalization Project, which is what I'm going to talk about. And that is a 105-mile stretch of the river between Percha Dam, which is just below Elephant Butte and Caballo Dam, downstream towards El Paso County. It's American Dam in El Paso County. And the Rio Grande Canalization Flood Control Project was built in the 30s and 40s. And the primary purpose of it was twofold. One was to facilitate deliveries under the Convention of 1906 with Mexico and to control floods. And it really consists of a rectified river channel with levees. So this is an example of what was done to the river in the 30s and 40s. They removed about 15 miles of river meanders in order to make this straightened stretch of the river that would manage floods and contain floods and deliver water. And so the agency would maintain the floodway by mowing the floodplain and dredging the river. And that was to maintain the primary purpose of the project. And so in the 90s, there were a handful of environmental groups that raised questions about the management of the river this way. So we began a long process of an environmental impact statement to figure out if this was the best way to manage the river. So in 2004, the agency was ready to issue a record of decision, but there was a request from the New Mexico governor not to issue the record of decision. Let's talk about this. Let's study this some more. And so that really began the first collaborative effort for this project, and that was the Rio Grande Collaborative. And so it was a handful of stakeholders that got together that wanted to address what's the best science to manage the river and how can we best deal with this. So there were environmental groups, irrigation districts, federal agencies, and they did a hydrologic modeling and conceptual restoration plan. And so the end result was a record of decision, and that's what we're implementing now. It's a 10-year project. We retain our mission essential items such as flood control, the ability to increase our flood containment capacity, but we're also implementing a handful of environmental measures along the Rio Grande, including restoration sites. So some of the environmental measures that are implementing under this record of decision include the elimination of grazing leases. We used to allow grazing along the river, but that's being phased out, as well as the implementation of 30 habitat restoration sites on about 550 acres, targeting a dozen different riparian habitats, including habitat for the endangered flycatcher, which is right there. We're managing the floodway in a different manner, including not mowing about 2,000 acres of it to establish managed grasslands. And then we also wanted to develop an environmental water rights program. So I'll talk about that in a second. But one of the ways that we've implemented this record of decision is through the stakeholder input. So we've had regular meetings with all our stakeholders that include the irrigation districts, local elected officials, environmental groups, federal agencies such as the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Bureau of Reclamation, as well as a handful of IBWC staff. It's through their participation that we've been able to come up with different means to address how we're going to implement these restoration efforts. And one of those means is a collaboration with the Fish and Wildlife Service to implement our restoration sites. And so the Fish and Wildlife Service has a Partners in Wildlife program that they were actually doing very similar restoration work along the river on property that does not belong to the IBWC. And so we came up with an interagency agreement to implement a handful of sites, and they're doing work on 5. Well, they started with 5, and then we added an additional 4 sites. And so I'm just going to go through a handful of those sites. One of the sites is Crow Canyon A and B. That's near Hatch area for anybody who's familiar with the area. And through the efforts of the Fish and Wildlife Service, they cleared 195 acres of salt cedar at this site. They've planted 250 black willows and cottonwood poles. And the native willows, these are all native willows that are returning based on just not mowing the site. And all these native willows have actually overpassed all the willows and cottonwoods that we've planted. This is the site in August of 2012. You can kind of see different layers of willows as they've come growing in over the years after not mowing. And then this is a wetland area, and there's some native vegetation and native grasses. And then this is a salt cedar bush that was treated. Unfortunately, this site was really hit hard by the drought. These are the same kind of willows that are just not doing very well in the extended drought. Another site is Broad Canyon, which is near Radium Springs, New Mexico. This picture is from 1940. It's before a sediment control dam was built on the river. So the river was actually really different there. But now in 2011, the site is just Montebic salt cedar. So in 2012, the Fish and Wildlife Service, under our interagency agreement, cleared all that salt cedar with an excavator. And then this is what the site looked like in 2012. About 20 acres of salt cedar was treated by excavation, except for this chunk that was left because a yellow-billed cuckoo was observed there. And the debris piles of salt cedar were let to dry, and then the Fish and Wildlife Service team conducted prescribed burns of those piles in January of 2013. And then after the debris piles were burned and cooled, we were able to plant. And so over the years, we've planted about 3,000 poles just at this particular site. And the poles are planted with an 8-foot auger. At this site, water is about 8 feet, 8 to 10 feet. So at this site, an 8-foot auger was sufficient. At other sites, an 8-foot auger is no longer sufficient now that we're in higher drought. We need a 12 or maybe even longer auger. This is the site in July of 2012. A handful of the willows are coming up, as well as some native brush. And then this past summer, it's really becoming a nice, dense environment. Not quite ready for flycatcher habitat, and there are some non-native weeds, but there's also some native bushes and grasses that are in there. And there's a few salt cedar that are coming back. So we also have some collaboration for flycatcher surveys, and the Bureau of Reclamation also manage the Elephant Butte reservoir and the dam, and so they are actually interested in doing surveys along the Rio Grande for the flycatcher as well. And so instead of both agencies doing surveys and paying taxpayer money to do the surveys, we made another interagency agreement to work together to collaborate on the flycatcher surveys. So this is really beneficial for both agencies, and the way it works is the agencies alternate years to pay for the surveys along the river. And we have to do surveys because we have, under our Section 7 consultation for the Endangered Species Act, that's one of our requirements to implement this program, is to conduct annual surveys. So this really helps out both agencies. Another collaboration is with state parks in New Mexico. So there's a handful of state parks in the in the canalization project, and one of those is the USIBWC State Park in Las Cruces. And so we have now partnered with Fish and Wildlife and the USIBWC State Park in order to implement restoration. So they're doing restoration there, and what the idea is we can help them. We can help them maybe look into the possibility of buying water rights for them and then sharing the restoration work on that site. But one of the huge partnerships that I wanted to talk about is the establishment of our environmental water rights program, which IBWC can say we've established it, but really we couldn't have done it without all the entities that were behind it. So the idea of this environmental water rights program is to offset water that we're using for restoration. So when we plant trees along the river, we're using water that belongs to somebody. It's a fully allocated system. The water belongs to Farmer Smith or Farmer whoever. And by planting these trees, we're taking that water. And so the idea of this environmental water rights program was to offset those depletions by the additional vegetation communities. It's also to provide supplemental irrigation. And it's also for the idea of an environmental flow or to simulate overbank conditions. We need to acquire about 500 acres in order to offset the requirements that we have in our record of decision. And we want to do this only through willing sellers, and we want to pay for market value. But how do we do that? We don't really have the mechanism to do it. So what we did was we established under the same interagency agreement with the Fish and Wildlife Service. They have the mechanism through different organizations that are very familiar with Western water rights transfers. And so one of those is the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And they in turn partnered with Audubon, New Mexico. And so this public-private partnership is a very unique way of addressing our needs to offset the water. They were working to develop all the rules, all the enabling conditions. How was the agency going to establish this water rights program? It's pretty complicated in New Mexico. There's a handful of different laws and regulations, and so the idea was to work with the irrigation districts and the Bureau to figure out how this was going to work. If you're interested in more about the rules and stuff about what was actually done, Beth Bardwell is going to be talking to I think this afternoon on that topic. But through this environmental water program, we also had a collaborative relationship with a local irrigation district, the Elephant Butte Irrigation District. And so we established a memorandum of understanding with them that we were going to work together to figure out how this federal agency could become a farmer. That was really what we needed to do. And so in 2013, the board of the irrigation district passed a policy that would classify the irrigation of the restoration sites as an agricultural use, which was huge. I think that's the first time in New Mexico that that's done, but I'm not sure. And so this really was what enabled us to be able to buy water rights and irrigate native plants and call ourselves a farmer. That way we could be viewed as a farmer and we can go by all the rules of the irrigation district. And then in summer of 2014, the irrigation district board approved the first transfer of water rights to our federal lands. And then we were able to irrigate one of our sites. And so this is a really exciting deal. We had a huge, these are our willow and cottonwood trees at one of the sites in Las Cruces, where we're trying to establish flycatcher habitat. So they're dense. And this site received irrigation water in the summer of 2014. So this is what it looked like in May of 2014. And then after that irrigation in June, it now looks like this. So without water, we really can't establish much of anything. The river in this part of the country has, last year in 2013, it had 6 weeks of water in the summer. So we really depend on supplemental water for some of these sites. It was such a huge deal that we had a very big event, a lot of press. That's our commissioner that was thanking all of the participants. And we have thanking all of the partners that we're working to establish this environmental water transaction partnership. The Irrigation District, Fish and Wildlife Service, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and Audubon, New Mexico. So just in summary, IBWC can say we've done all this restoration work, but really it's only through the collaboration of all these different entities. And we really need all of that stakeholder input. We need all the collaborative relationships between our key stakeholders. It's through these collaborations that we've planted about almost 6,000 trees, and we have tens of thousands more in the works. We have cleared or treated about 350 acres of salt cedar. We have, through our partnerships, developed enabling conditions and procedures to have water rights on our restoration sites. Purchased just about 6 acres of water rights and irrigated the first restoration site. It's a historic event and set us on the path to meeting all of our restoration goals in the Record of Decision. So thank you to all of our partners. If anybody's interested, here's a website for more information and then my contact.
Did your irrigation water come from the river or shallow wells in that site?
That irrigation was surface water, and it came from we can't pump from the river because that would be an illegal diversion. We have to get special permission from this Office of the Engineer in order to pump directly from the river, so that's not allowed. The way that the water had to come was down through the irrigation canals and had to be metered by the irrigation district. So we're a farmer. It has to come through the irrigation system.
Hello. How difficult was it to figure out how much water you needed to acquire? I mean, a maturing, restored area would transpire more and more water every year. So just curious about that.
That was part of what was analyzed in our conceptual restoration plan through the Rio Grande Collaborative. So the Corps came up with a restoration plan that said this vegetation type, they used a formula. So dense salt cedar uses up X amount of, it transpires X amount of acre feet per year, and a dense willows is going to use up this amount. So that was, they estimated the evapotranspiration rate, and that's what we used in order to calculate the amount of water that we were going to need. Beth, in this afternoon's talk, can probably elaborate more on that. But part of what they established with the irrigation district was how we were going to be charged for each site. And so if a particular site has a decrease or an increase, unless it's zero, if it's dense flycatcher habitat, it was equivalent water use as dense salt cedar. So that was net zero, and that particular site we didn't have to water right. But other sites we would, and we would water right the entire site. Okay. So it complicated mathematics and calculations, but I think in the end, it's now a simple process to be able to figure that out.
Question here on Flycatcher. What reaches were surveyed, and what were your findings?
We surveyed, the Bureau surveyed from Caballo Reservoir down to American Dam. And they've been surveying there for several years. And they're coming up with actually numbers that meet or exceed the numbers in the recovery plan that was established by Fish and Wildlife Service in 2000. I think they want 25 territories, and it's been about that or more, which is good news. We're hoping that it's going to stay that way after the drought.
And are those findings territories in your re-veg sites or the Bureau's re-veg?
There's a handful, yes, that are on our restoration sites. There's some that correlate with ours and some that correlate with with some of the other collaborative restoration sites along this stretch of the river.
I was wondering what the water market looks like in the area, and if, the I think you said the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is the one sort of acquiring the water.
The Fish and Wildlife Services, they're helping us through their interagency agreement, but it's actually the agency that's in the end acquiring the rights. So they're real property. They're going to be on our property rolls. And that was part of what our partners, specifically Audubon, had to evaluate was how that was going to be calculated. I don't know, Beth, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, so through this partnership with USIBWC and Fish and Wildlife Service and National Fish and Wildlife Foundation down to Audubon and another organization called Ecosystem Economics, we did put together and populated a lot of the Rio Grande Environmental Water Transaction Program, and one of it was doing market research and programmatic appraisal for estimate of fair market value of what the water rights are valued at in the Elephant Butte Irrigation District. And we also did combine, so it was what surface water rights are valued at and what combined surface and groundwater water rights are valued at in that district. So we provided that information. It was really essential information for the federal acquisition policies, and so we provided that information. And then I was going to also address the other question as to how much water, how do you determine what the water budget is for a particular restoration site? And so what we were able to do is simplify that calculation. And so the agreement reached with the irrigation district is if you put a base water right on that restoration site, and you got an annual allocation of 6 inches, your site may actually evapotranspirate a whole lot more, but it didn't matter as long as you had that base water right. So it was a really simple calculation, and it made the project much easier to implement. So we were really looking for parity between farmers and restoration sites. So just like a pecan farm or an alfalfa field may get 6 inches of water, and it may actually tap into groundwater, passively irrigate. That's what's happening at these restoration sites as well. So the irrigation district wanted parity in how each water user was being allocated water. So it didn't matter in the conceptual world. Sure, it matters in the physical world, but not in our conceptual framework. That helps. And I'm going to be giving a talk later on today, so happy to answer more questions then.
Thanks, Beth.
Great. So we're on the permanent record now. Elizabeth, is there any discussion about developing an in lieu fee program in that reach of the river, sort of a mitigation bank, but a little bit different for habitat?
For our agency or just in general?
Well, between your agency and private landowners that have water rights and agricultural land.
We're going to move into the next phase of purchasing water rights, and that would be trying to find willing sellers. We want to buy water rights only from willing sellers at fair market value.
Okay. I was just asking because I think with an in lieu fee program, the idea would be incentivizing folks. You wouldn't necessarily have to buy their water rights. They would retain their water rights, but it simply be a conversion of what they grow with the water that they have the right to help offset, impacts to habitat that may occur through activities by IBWC or others. We can talk about it more, but I was just wondering if there's been any discussion about it.
No, but it's a good suggestion.
Thank you, Elizabeth.